And I'm going to mute everybody. And Rabbi, please unmute again. And it's great to see everyone. Any questions, you can either raise your hand, chat to me. And I think we're ready to begin. No Way to Treat a Lady.
Great. Welcome. I hope everybody found the movie okay, and I hope you found it enjoyable once you found it okay. So an interesting movie from 1968, directed by a fellow named Jack Smite, written by John Gay, based on a novel by William Goldman. William Goldman's maybe the most familiar name actually among those folks. The producer was named Sol Siegel, so it gives you a little bit of a sense of perhaps how a movie like this gets made. And of course, we'll talk about some of the actors and actresses as we go along. But George Siegel, we're still in the Shloshim for George Siegel. He just passed away just before Pesach. So it's a nice memorial, I think, in a certain way, to be able to watch one of his movies, and certainly a movie that shows him, on his way up, in a sense, becoming a pretty big star in his own right in Hollywood. He was born in 1934. His grandparents were Russian Jewish immigrants. He didn't always play Jewish characters on screen, at least not always explicitly, but he certainly played a fair number of Jewish characters, and certainly never did anything, or perhaps just decided he never could do anything to hide his Jewishness, and he wore it on his face in a lot of ways. So, he made his first kind of splash in a movie called The Young Doctors in 1961, but it was really Ship of Fools in 1965, and then King Rat also in 1965. And then he was cast by Mike Nichols in Mike Nichols' first movie as a director, the movie version of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, where all of a sudden he's in this movie with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. I mean, he was nominated for the Oscar for that movie as Best Supporting Actor, and there's no question that he holds his own in that movie, which is really four people in a room. So it's it showed him as a talent to be reckoned with. That movie, by the way, along with a couple of others that we've watched already, they helped to wreck the censorship code that had existed in Hollywood for 30 years. So the language and subject matter and adultery and so forth of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf was another nail in the coffin of the ratings board. So yeah, a lot of scenes from that. So as I said, an Oscar-nominated performance. You may know him for some of the things he did after that. Certainly, you got to hand it to him for the company he kept on screen. I'm appearing with Glenda Jackson in A Touch of Class, for example, for which she was nominated for the Oscar. He's with Barbara Streisand in The Owl and the Pussycat, and then has really a second career in television. And you may know him more from those shows where he plays kind of an eccentric magazine publisher in a show called Just Shoot Me, and more recently appears as the family patriarch in a show called The Goldbergs. So, I think he will be missed by family, but also by film goers, and so I think of him very fondly. And one of the roles I think of him in is this one, as a Jewish policeman from the 1960s. So in this movie with him are some other well-known actors and actresses and familiar faces. So of course the love interest, Kate Palmer, is Lee Remick, who made her debut in a movie called A Face in the Crowd. I mentioned that last week. If you get a chance, it shows up on Turner Classic Movies now and then, and is a remarkably prescient movie. That's definitely worth a look if you get a chance. And she that there's a picture there of her with her arms out right on my screen now. That's from that movie. I think she plays a cheerleader who becomes the wife of the main character after he is judging a contest. She went on to uh, do a lot of movies, and you might remember her in The Long Hot Summer or in the Otto Preminger movie Anatomy of a Murder. She got an Oscar nomination for Days of Wine and Roses, which I think is actually showing on Turner Classic Movies this week. So if you want to catch her Oscar nominated role, I think you'll be able to find it. She also appeared on stage in the play Wait Until Dark and received a Tony nomination for that, for her role there. So, an actress who probably doesn't get her due because this, of course, happens in Hollywood because she was pretty. And so people don't actually always recognize her acting chops. A little bit later in her life, she appeared in The Omen with Gregory Peck. She died too young, kidney cancer, and she was only 55 years old. So she would probably have done more work, of course, if she'd survived. So, and then the other couple of roles we should mention for sure are the actress playing George Segal's mother in this movie, Eileen Heckert, best known as a stage actress, though she definitely appeared in a lot of movies over the years. She really, in a way, she would say it herself that she financed her stage career by appearing in movies. So but on stage she starred in Picnic. She got a Tony nomination. She won a Tony, I think, for The Bad Seed on Broadway. Also a Tony nomination for Butterflies Are Free, and a Tony nomination for appearing in The Dark at the Top of the Stairs. She was also in Pal Joey and Barefoot in the Park and many other things. She won an Emmy for a show called Love and War back in 1992. She actually got an Oscar nomination for a couple of the roles that she first played on stage. She got an Oscar nomination for The Bad Seed, and she won the Oscar in 1972 for the film adaptation of Butterflies Are Free. So, so that's just 3 or 4 years after making No Way to Treat a Lady. So she wasn't Jewish, but she does a credible job here, I think, playing a Jewish mother of a particular kind. Commonplace in the 1960s, probably not so much now, right? The overbearing Jewish mother, right? Made most famous perhaps by Philip Roth. Portnoy's Complaint is the you can decide whether that's the height of that or the depths of it, but that kind of a portrayal. But I think in this movie, it's particularly interesting and perhaps a bit different than it is in a lot of other movies, and we'll get to that. And of course, we want to mention Rod Steiger, who we've now seen a couple of times before this already in movies. His starring role in The Pawnbroker, and also, of course, we saw him in The Chosen just a couple of weeks ago. And here, not playing a Jewish character, presumably playing an Irish character of Irish descent, although it's a bit difficult to tell since he plays so many parts, many faces, many accents in this movie. Guys, I love him in this movie. I think he's terrific. The reviews at the time were not so kind to Rod Steiger. I think they missed something, to be honest. So, a lot of the reviews at the time talked about him hamming it up and overacting, and it's like that. I think it's far more subtle than that, actually, because the character he's playing is a bad actor, right? I mean, he is, you know, so I think this is a level of performance that the critics didn't get, right? And perhaps on the surface, if you only watch the movie one time, maybe you don't get it. But the point is that his mother never thought he would amount to anything as an actor. He didn't amount to anything as an actor. That's part of the motivation for the things that his character does in the movie. And so the fact that he's not good at, or that he over emotes and overacts all the different parts he plays is actually a part of the performance. And I think that that's far more subtle than the critics gave it credit for. I think so. Anyway, I'm a Rod Steiger fan, unabashedly, and I like him in this movie. I think that it's quite interesting in that regard. And what this movie is about, in a certain sense, is about the relationship of two men with their mothers. Right? And this is a kind of a classic police procedural in that sense, right? Many, you know, whether it's private eye movies or police movies, are built on this kind of doubling of the characters, right? You can think even of a movie. Let's something like Silence of the Lambs, let's say, right? What does the Jodie Foster character have in common with Dr. Hannibal Lecter, right? They are two sides of the same coin, in a sense. They are, you know, both formed by trauma in their childhood. They are both smarter than anybody else in the room, right? There's a lot of things that those two characters have in common. And this is a convention of this kind of genre, right? Whether it's the thing that's become sort of commonplace now, right? The police officer trying to put himself in the head of the serial killer, right? Trying to identify with the serial killer, and by doing that, being able to think about what that person's next move will be, right? And so in this movie, as I said, we have these two characters in pursuit of each other in a certain sense, right? Particularly, of course, the police officer in pursuit of the killer, but the killer now singles out the police officer as the one, the one he'll talk to, right? And so the linchpin of that doppelganger story, the way they echo each other, is their relationships with their mothers, right? So there's a scene about midway through the movie when at the scene of a crime, right, and the forensic analyst is there and says, you know, that this is the killer is showing signs that he hates his mother, and George Siegel says, imagine that, a son hating his mother, right? And you know, having seen the relationship with his mother, we get that there's some kind of connection there. In the end, I think this movie actually makes a case for the Jewish mother, as played by Eileen Heckart, as being the positive role model for what a mother should be, right? Rather than, right? It's the, now we don't actually meet Rod Steiger's mother in person in this movie. We see her only as a you know, a marble statue, as paintings and posters on the wall, right, in the theater. We hear about her not thinking he would amount to much. I mean, those kinds of things. But so the case is made that her kind of dominance over her son is unhealthy, where the Jewish mother's dominance is healthy, right? This is a fairly difficult argument to make in a certain sense, but I think those are the parallels that it sets out. And certainly I think Eileen Heckart plays it with there's a certain amount of playfulness in this, right? In the relationship. They have gone through this thing about breakfast many times before. For example, when she, you know, the things that she says about, you know, his not eating and that sort of thing. Let me see if I can find my notes on that. Yeah. So first of all, we see there the apartment that he shares with his mother, and filled, by the way, if you didn't notice in the art and set design, you probably all saw Kiddush cups, a menorah, candlesticks in the background, and of course, every food she serves, right? I'm, is something familiar to Ashkenazic Jews, right? So she's giving him latkes for breakfast, which is his complaint,
I thought the most brilliant was how Lee Remick played her by saying that the brother was good, and she
yes,
she
yeah.
says,
If only I'd met Franklin first.
and she's like, I like her.
Yes, yeah. I mean, so that's a linchpin scene, of course. I mean, for them now, but I will say that even before she does that, where she's clearly um, getting his mother on her side, and imitating her, as you said, right? But even before that, you see that she is a kind of a take control kind of person, right? She does have more in common with his mother than perhaps one might expect he would choose in a partner. But so even really early on, I mean, she takes a lot of control, and she pokes fun at him. I guess you'd call it fun, right? When he calls her in to look at, to draw pictures, and he shows her sort of proudly the fingerprint lab. He says we have 3 million fingerprints here, and there's 3 million fingerprints. None of them are his, right? It's so I think it's a very interesting thing. So latkes for breakfast. He recites the words right along with her when she starts to say, I have to push the food down your throat, right? They say that line together. So how many times has he heard his mother say at breakfast, I have to push the food down your throat, right? So this is a kind of a rehearsed um, uh, argument that they have regularly, and is a part of their, I would say, their loving relationship, their banter, if you like. So
Um, yeah.
and as he goes out, she's saying, be here for Shabbos dinner, kreplach, flanken, and he says, don't you think you're overdoing it just a bit? He says, right, just step it back a little. On the other hand, he totally needs her, right? As he's leaving, he forgets his jacket. If he doesn't have somebody to remind him, right, he's one of those people who will leave things behind, right? And so,
Shoshana, did you have a
yeah,
question or a comment?
I have a question.
Yeah.
How did Lee Remick know to play this, his mother's role? She has never, I mean, it takes also guts to come to his mother the first time to visit and take such an aggressive role. How did
Yeah.
she know to do it?
So the only way we can answer that is we have to assume that this couple has seen each other more times than we see in the movie, right? A movie isn't necessarily, strictly speaking, once in a while you have a movie that plays out in real time, right? That the 2 hours of the movie are 2 hours in the life of the character. But here we have something that plays out over time. So we have to understand that he has not exactly prepared her to do this, but told her about his mother and what kind of relationship they have. And so she's able to do this, and it does show again a sign of her sort of take charge personality, that she will dare to do that, right? It could have gone badly, but we see her. And by the way, there's the question of interfaith relationships and things like that in here. She says to the mother, one of the first things is, I've been studying, I forget the exact line, but I've been studying Judaism, since I was 10 years old or something like that. So let me see if I wrote that line down. Not seeing it in my notes here. I'm surprised that I don't have the actual. actual line, but so she,
I think you were about right with that, 10
Yeah.
years old.
right, right. So, one of my favorite lines in terms of, so if there's a doubling between the killer and the policeman, there's a doubling between the mother and the girlfriend. And one of the places we see that, so I mentioned the one where it says, imagine that going out to strangle your mother, right? And talking about the killer. But he has to call Lee Remick and tell her that he can't come to dinner. And she goes through that, well, it's nothing, just a crummy dinner anyway. I'll just eat it myself, all that kind of stuff. And then she says to him, tonight, you be careful. And he gets off the phone and says to his partner, you know what she said? She said, be careful. Isn't that beautiful? And he starts to laugh, right? So he reads between the lines of what his mother says to him, what his girlfriend says to him, right? He takes from that, he takes from the sort of the guilt and all of that stuff, instead of a negative, he takes it as a positive, right? It shows her love and concern. Okay? So I think that's quite interesting, actually. And so, as I said, I think the movie in some way makes the case for that kind of mothering, rather than what we can assume was a more cold mothering that Rod Steiger's mother provided for him, or didn't provide for him. Right? So in that sense, I think it's a very interesting pairing. And then, of course, the movie gives Rod Steiger a chance to play all of these different characters and do all sorts of different things. So I think it's entertaining in that regard. So I mentioned the director early on, Jack Smite. I don't think is of Jewish descent. He won an Emmy in 1959 for a movie that he did for television starring Mickey Rooney called Eddie. He did lots of television movies, more so than Hollywood movies. He directed a number of episodes of The Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock Presents. But he did make some other movies. And again, I see his name pop up on things. There was just an old Warren Beatty movie on Turner Classic Movies the other night, directed by Jack Smite, called Kaleidoscope. Little, not so seen all that often, but an interesting guy. The writer, John Gay, actually got an Oscar nomination his first time writing a screenplay. It was for a movie called Separate Tables in 1958. This movie, as I mentioned, was based on a novel by William Goldman. I believe he was born in Highland Park, Illinois. I don't know if anybody on the call knows his family or anything like that. I don't, but I see the Sonneborns nodding. Yeah. So born in the neighborhood in 1931. He comes from Jewish immigrants in that first wave of immigration, as a lot of the early Jews in Highland Park were from that German Jewish immigration in the 1850s. So his family came over around that time from Germany and Bohemia. So his family, when he was born in 1931, his family had been in the country for 3/4 of a century already. Somewhat unusual in the overall Jewish community. Sandra, did you want to say something? Do you know the family? Can you unmute?
Yes, and William Goldman had a very Jewish mother. I went in to interview his mother one day, for about some volunteerism she was doing. The first thing she said to me was, "My son wrote 2 books."
Yeah.
This was back in the 70s.
Uh-huh. Okay. Do you know which 2 he had written by then? I'm not sure.
No, I don't.
Yeah. So, he was a prolific writer of novels and screenplays. And there's no question that you've all seen the movies that he's written. I mean, he wrote Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, you know. So we're past John Gay, and it's not John Gay, the Elizabethan author, but William Goldman, right? William Goldman from Highland Park. So he wrote Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He wrote the screenplay for All the President's Men. He wrote Marathon Man. He wrote the book and the screenplay, I think, for The Princess Bride. So, you know, not only did he write scripts that are very well received in Hollywood, but also wrote, you know, he was a script doctor when people weren't confident of the script they had. William Goldman was a guy they would bring in to fix it, you know, before they went into production. So truly, I mean, a writer of classic movies. So maybe we can't call this one quite up to that sort of classic, but you know, very much a beloved figure in Hollywood, a terrific screenwriter. You see some pictures of him various times, a novelist and screenwriter. So I think what did I see in the? Yeah, Elaine mentions that we see her after she tells the mother that she's been studying Judaism since she was 10, that in her apartment she's reading a cookbook, Jewish cooking, right? So she's preparing for her future with Mo Brummel Morris, you know. So I think that's interesting. I've always thought that the movie misses a beat with the food that comes in. She should be suspicious sooner about the food that Rod Steiger brings, because it mixes meat and milk together.
Oh.
So I've always thought she should be a little more suspicious of that before. So I don't know. It's a minor thing that probably I wouldn't be surprised if it was in a draft somewhere and somebody decided it was too inside Judaism, you know, to try and play that out. I have no proof of that, but I just think that you know, that possibility was there. Now, I will say that William Goldman, this is where the fact that his immigrant roots go back to the first wave of immigration, that German Jewish immigration, which was much more, I don't want to say assimilated, that's not exactly right, but they were much more a part of German life and culture than the Russian Jews who were, you know, confined to shtetls and things like that. So the Russian Jews came, and leaving kashrut behind was a big deal for them. For the German Jewish group that came in the 1850s, leaving kashrut behind was not such a big deal. We see evidence in this in for example, the ordination of the first class of rabbis from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. Well, at that time, just the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, which had been founded by Isaac Mayer Wise from Bohemia and populated by Jews who came from that German Jewish immigration. And at the feast that they served at the first ordination, they served every kind of treif that there is, just about. Everything but pork itself. They ate frog's legs, they had meat, and then they had a course of cheeses. They had, you know, all sorts of things that they had shellfish, right? Everything except pork itself was a part of the menu. So so perhaps coming from his German Jewish roots, the idea of Mo Brummel sending a dish that had meat and milk together wasn't in any way troubling to William Goldman's Jewish sensibilities. So that's a possibility. So, yeah, and Elaine points out, yeah, she knows the killer is running around. She still lets him in. I mean, it's, you know, presumably she knows that the killer has singled out Mo Brummel, especially, for phone calls and all that kind of stuff at that point. So, some things we chalk up to it's the movies, right? So I'd like to think that some people, that we in real life would be smarter than that, right? Than to let the killer in just because he comes bearing food. So,
Ed has a question or a comment.
sure.
Ike, do you have any idea, and do you care to comment on how do you think that the killer, Steiger, picked, and why did he pick his victims that he was going to kill?
Yeah. It's nothing is made clear except that there is sort of a type. I mean, it's a middle-aged
Single woman.
Yeah, and so his attacking Lee Remick is against type, right? I mean, it's older women. We don't have a very clear picture about it, but they seem in some way to remind him of his mother. Sometimes it's opportunity, but I think it sometimes it's a more deliberate choice than that. We start out with, so the question, that's why I started out with, so is he meant to be of Irish descent, or are we able to actually, is he sort of tormented by his Catholicism and his sin? I don't know if we can say that for sure. We draw on that mostly from the beginning of the movie, where his first appearance is as Father Malloy, right? So, and by the way, there's an interesting juxtaposition there too, right? I mean, one of the things that Mo's mother says to him is, how can you hope to succeed as a Jewish policeman? Everyone knows you have to be Irish to get anywhere on the police force in New York, right? And juxtapose that with Rod Steiger playing an Irish priest, right? There is a fair amount of, if there's a lot of Jewish imagery in the movie about the Jewish character, there's a fair amount of Christian imagery in this movie as well, right? Or if not exactly imagery, then language. And so, when Father Malloy gets into this woman's apartment and she serves him port, and he says, "Red like the blood he shed for you and me," right? And he talks about his mother in that scene too. The woman says she's not a Catholic anymore. When her husband died, she lost her faith, and he starts talking about his sweet sainted mother, as he says, who she used to walk down the streets like a schoolgirl. And that's this sort of mixed conversation that he keeps having about his mother. I mean, his mother is beautiful, but he also implies, talks about how sinful that she is, right? That men would stop and stare, and those kinds of things, which, by the way, we just saw him do. If you remember, this goes by very fast, but at the beginning of the movie, dressed as the priest, he's walking down the street, and a young woman walks by in a short skirt. He says "top of the morning" to her, and then as she passes, he turns around and stares at her as she walks away, right? This is all, of course, before we know who he is and what he's going to do, so it may not register so clearly. But this conflict of religion and lust that he associates with his mother seems to have something to do with the age of the women that he picks, and how he behaves. So and his his murders involve a caress, usually when we see them on screen. I mean, it's a conflict of interests. Yeah. So Yeah, Brenda asked, can we compare his fixation with his mother to Norman Bates in Psycho? And I think certainly we can compare those two, right? The difference of course, is in, well, not to give away the ending of Psycho for anybody who hasn't seen it, but Norman Bates impersonates his mother, right? Whereas in this movie, the killer looks for people who remind him of his mother so that he can kill her over and over again. We don't know whether he killed her in the first place. Right? We don't actually know how his mother died, right? Maybe she's his first victim. We really don't know. But so there are some similarities and some differences. Clearly, Sigmund Freud plays a role in these movies. I mean, both in Psycho and in this movie, right? And these things kind of maybe a simplifying of Freudian theory, but it made for good cinema. Brenda, you want to say something?
Yeah, there was another movie. I can't think of the name of it. It's very famous with James Cagney. He also had a fixation, and at the end, I mean, he's also killed a lot of people.
Yeah.
And at the end, he goes, "Top of the world, ma, top of the world."
Right, White Heat, I think.
Right, right.
Yeah. So yeah, and Nancy put in the Madonna whore thing. I actually have that in my notes somewhere. That's very much a part of the fixation of this killer. Right? So what else? What other things you guys saw? Did you get? I think it's interesting how Kate Palmer makes some comments about his nose when she meets Mo the first time. Not specifically, calling it a Jewish nose, leaving that up to us, I suppose, but she calls it a sweet nose, not handsome, she says, but a sweet nose for a cop. So, and again, perhaps in there's a comparison between whatever the stereotype of a Jewish man would be with what an Irish cop would look like, right? So, some of this text is left unsaid, but I think it's perhaps there.
The other thing that I saw, and I heard her voice, and it took me a hot minute, but
Oh yeah, Doris Roberts.
Doris Roberts.
Yeah.
And I realize now I know her from Everyone Loves Raymond, but she must have been, there she is, a screen actress, and that was also an interesting little. His plans are, foiled there. And I also kept thinking that today, there's, caller ID, you can track someone down,
Right.
and that, you wouldn't be able to do that, which I guess is a good thing. And they, eventually did find him, and, and all the different rotary phones he had to use, but.
So yeah, if you look up Doris Roberts on, the database or something, she's been acting since the 50s. She had a lot of roles in the early days of television on, various live TV shows and things like that. So I guess she made a living as an actress all those years, but of course became a star. I think a Tony winner, Emmy winner for Everybody Loves Raymond, if I'm not mistaken. But so it's interesting how, she never made it as a leading lady in her youth, but, became well respected and by this time in her career, well remunerated for what she does.
I'm Gail, go ahead.
When we watched the movie, my first comment at the end of the movie was, I hated the portrayal of the mother. I found it offensive in today's world, knowing what we know. And I had trouble watching the whole movie because it was such a stereotypical Jewish mother that it offended me. And I know that when the movie was made, it probably wasn't portrayed as such. But that colored my whole viewing of the movie,
Right.
that I didn't care for the portrayal of a Jewish mother. So I thought so overacted. In
Yeah.
today's movies, it wouldn't have happened like that. So I had a little difficulty watching that movie because of that.
Right. So this is, you know, it's a very important point, and it's definitely worth talking about. And it's, you know, do we, you know, how much do we watch something like this? You know, look, you know, there was a lot of controversy this year about Gone with the Wind, right? So, you know,
Mhm.
that you shouldn't show Gone with the Wind anymore, you know, at least not without someone unpacking it first, right? And what about the early movie? You know, D.W. Griffith, you know, made a movie, Birth of a Nation, you know, the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, right? You know, portrays the Klan in a very positive light in Birth of a Nation. So, so books and movies, art in general, are the products of the time that they're made in. And the question is, are we willing to dissociate ourselves enough from what we know now to enter back into a time where things were different, right? Think of African American actors and actresses for generations. And again, Gone with the Wind is a really good example, but there, you know, many examples, you know, where, you know, people who were probably excellent actors and actresses never got the chance to do anything on screen except playing, you know, servants and slaves, right? So it's an interesting and difficult problem, and some people can make that separation and say, I can watch this movie and I see it as kind of a historical document, and while it's an offense to portray a Jewish woman that way, it's not. It doesn't mean I can't watch the movie anymore. Let's put it that way, right? And then, of course, that's before we even start talking about the personal biographies of the people who make movies and how much we should separate their lives from their art. You know, Roman Polanski, Woody Allen. I mean, those are the two examples of that where, you know, can we separate a movie like Annie Hall or Manhattan, particularly Manhattan, which is about an older man having an affair with a much younger woman? You know, can we separate that from what we know about Woody Allen's personal life? So there's a lot of different levels to this. But I think, as you said, when this movie came out in the 1960s, it falls into a milieu there that I didn't find a single review of this movie from that time that says that character was a problem, that it was overacted, that it was over the top. I mean, it was accepted, right? Good thing people have pushed back on it over the years, and you wouldn't see a portrayal like that anymore. So I'd say even more so, you know, the character that Goldie Hawn plays in Private Benjamin, for example. I'm you know, the term that we have pretty successfully gotten out of the Jewish community, the Jewish American princess, right, is something that was very acceptable in the movies at a certain point, and very difficult to dissociate from and watch a movie like that again. So, so I understand why you have that feeling, and you know, my bottom line response to it in this sense is, you know, some people can't watch horror movies, right? Because the violence, whatever, is too much for them in movies. I, for whatever reason, even from the time I was very young, was very able to say, this is only a movie. It's not real, right? And so to be able to do that with any movie, you know, whether it's because it's viscerally violent or because it has a portrayal of a particular character. Some folks are talking about the being creeped out by Rod Steiger because he was so good, right? If you know, for me, it always comes back to, you know, this is a document. This was created by somebody. It's of its time and place, and you know, you can watch it or not watch it at your pleasure, right? So, what about the characters in the movie Avalon? Brenda, do you want to expand on that question a little?
Yeah, I thought there was a lot of stereotypes in Avalon. I know the critics loved it. I didn't love it.
Yeah.
And again, I think there, especially the scene, I can't believe you ate the turkey without,
Cut the turkey.
or cut the turkey.
Without me. Yeah, well, look, we all have our individual tastes when it comes to this. I will point out in the movie Avalon, I mean, I think one of the interesting things about it is that it never really explicitly says those are Jews. They gather together twice a year as family on the 4th of July and on Thanksgiving. They don't get together for Seder. They don't get together for Rosh Hashanah dinner. I mean, it's very interesting in that regard. And not the first time. I mean, Barry Levinson, who made that movie and who I think would cop to the fact that that some of the stuff he's made is kind of loosely autobiographical. You may remember his movie earlier was Diner. I don't know if any of you are fans of Diner. I remember seeing Diner. I think it came out when I was in college. And all through the movie, I was thinking to myself, I really recognize those guys, you know, but none of them are explicitly Jewish until the last scene of the movie. The last scene of the movie is a wedding, and all of a sudden, some of those guys are wearing kippot for the wedding, right? They have to be blue and white because of Baltimore Colts colors, but you know, not because of the Israeli flag. But so again, Barry Levinson has made a bunch of movies that I think as Jews, we say are about Jews, but I'm not sure that other people, you know, I'm not, you know, I've talked to, I talked to a guy I know who's actually a Greek Orthodox priest. When that movie, we were studying when that movie came out, and he thought it was about a Greek family. So, and I think I've heard stories like that too about Italians, that they thought that Avalon was about an Italian family. So maybe we all have the same stereotypes. I mean, that's certainly possible. But it's sort of interesting in a way how, you know, you could make a case for that this is what, it's interesting to make movies about Jews that don't explicitly say the Jews in them are Jews, right? They're just people. So.
I think it goes back to Fiddler on the Roof. Everyone thinks it's about their family and that it's as popular in Japan as it is on
Right.
Broadway.
Speaking of Fiddler on the Roof, did you notice the rabbi in this movie? The actor who plays the rabbi in Fiddler on the Roof is in this movie. In a very, he's got a tiny cameo. He's one of, I think there's 3 guys who, when the prostitute has been murdered in their building, they come to complain about her. You know, can you get her out of the building, right? One of those guys is a guy named Zvi Schooler, and he plays the rabbi in Fiddler on the Roof. He has the white beard. He's got the whole thing going in this movie. He also appears as Richard Dreyfuss's Zadie in The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz. And he appears in a Woody Allen movie called Love and Death, playing, I think he's the grandfather in that movie as well, if memory serves, maybe an uncle. I can't remember, or a father. I don't know if you've seen Love and Death. I mean, but there's actually a great sort of inside joke there, which is that Zvi Schooler in The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz keeps harping on to his grandson Duddy that you're nobody in this country if you don't own some land. If you don't own property, if you don't own land, you're nobody, right? And then in the movie Love and Death, he talks about how he owns land and he holds it up. It's a little piece of sod, you know, about 1 foot by 1 foot, and he's built a little house on it, you know, and so he's making a joke about the character he played in Duddy Kravitz, I think, within that Woody Allen script. So anyhow, so it's, yeah, Zvi Schooler shows up in this in a very small part. You may have missed him if you blinked, right, or looked away, but he's there. A couple of the other smaller parts, we talked about Doris Roberts, but there's a couple of others. I'm sure a lot of people saw the Lieutenant Dawson, and he looked familiar, David Doyle, right? So best known probably for being Bosley on Charlie's Angels in the original Charlie's Angels TV series. But he's been in a million things. And then, of course, Michael Dunn, who shows up briefly in one scene.
It took me, I
Oh,
was spelling his
Schooler.
name right, but
Yeah.
Zvi Schooler.
Yep,
There he is, yeah, that's
and
him.
I think that actually is the one you just pointed to, I think is the one
Yeah.
from No Way to Treat a Lady, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
So-
and then the rest of them look like from
Right,
Love
you
and
see him there in Love and Death in the next row.
Yeah,
So, and you can see he was on Yiddish theater, Yiddish radio, a lot of things. Michael Dunn, he plays he's the little person who comes in to confess to the crimes, Mr. Kupperman. And no doubt those of you who are steeped in television, as I was, recognize him from some things. He was actually in Ship of Fools with George Segal a couple of years before this movie, but perhaps best known to us from his role on the Wild Wild West TV series, where he had a recurring role as Dr. Miguelito Loveless, right, an arch villain in the Wild Wild West TV show. He also is in an episode of Star Trek, the original Star Trek. I think that top row shot is from that, actually. So he carved out a pretty neat career for himself, and is kind of in influence on other little people who followed him and have made a career in the movies. So he too died young. I mean, he was only in his 30s, I think, when he passed away. But a well-known character actor in his time. So so this movie has some humor and has some darkness. I mean, it's a pretty interesting piece of work. And so in terms of humor, I think, when Mr. Kupperman comes to confess and George Segal says to him, I don't want to offend you, but the descriptions of the killer, he was taller. And his response is, see how I fooled them? I'm a master of disguise. Right? It's and when he says you can't possibly have done this, he accuses George Segal of being a bigot. Right, so it's very interesting. I think so. I'm trying to decide, how much awareness the movie has of that Jewish mother character being over the top, right? And then I don't know. I mean, I'd be interested in your thoughts, but I feel like the movie is somewhat self-aware of that and starting to play on a stereotype rather than perpetuate it. But I'm not 100, I wouldn't stake my life on that, but I think it's interesting to think about.
I think for the time period that they have an overbearing Jewish mother is just a shout out to, acknowledging that. And I have followed Abby Stein, who is, she's a transsexual, and she is glad that her community has come out against transsexuals, because she said at least they, recognize them. And there, there's a teeny little bit of that here. Julie Schlossberg, go ahead. You need to unmute.
I think that regarding the Jewish mother, I think it's really significant how her son turned out and how his attitude towards her. He's really a good guy that she raised. And when she does these things about breakfast or reminding him to take his jacket or something, he's not annoyed by that. He can get a kick out of it with the breakfast. He can go along with her. And So even though it might be kind of stereotypical in her portrayal, the outcome of what she did was raise a really good guy.
Yeah. And that's again, to go back to where we started, you know, you put this in parallel to the other character and his relationship with his mother, right? So which would you rather have? What kind of mother do you want, right? You want a mother who, you know, is cold and doesn't get involved in your life in that way, right? I'm, you know, the movie sort of makes the argument that you know, a mother like that, you know, leads to you becoming a serial killer, right? You know, so I mean, we are obviously playing this in some ways in a very broad way, but that's the parallel that the movie sets up, right? That yeah, maybe she's over involved in his life, maybe she makes too many comments about what he eats or doesn't eat and all that kind of stuff. But he sees all of that as her love and care for him, right? And that's how he feels it, and that makes him into a good person, right? So it's interesting. It's obviously exaggerated. It's obviously a portrayal we wouldn't do exactly the same way if someone were to remake this movie. But the parallel, I think, would stay the same. That right, having a mother who is deeply involved in your life is a positive, right? And you know, and that's the message overall that the movie attempts to convey, right? She is, despite everything, I think a positive figure. He sees her as a positive figure, and she is a positive figure in his life.
Nancy Coleman has her hand up.
I was just going to say that George Segal's character is kind of a mama's boy, not in a terrible sense, but that he really relies on her to kind of keep his life in order so he can go about his business. And I think we don't know what Rod Steiger's mother was like, but you could think of the obverse of the Eileen Heckert shrewishness and in Steiger's mother, who was constantly on his case about he was a failure, he was never going to be successful, he was ugly, he was whatever horrible things a mother could say. And I sort of think of that as, I imagine that as something that you could draw a line or parallels in opposite characters, but parallels with what must have gone on, what may have gone on in Steiger's life.
Julie.
And this movie is absolutely about those parallels. Right? I mean, that's how it's constructed, is putting them in parallel.
Julie, go.
Yes, so the George Segal character obviously loved his mother and respected her and was greatly influenced by her. And when it went to his love interest, he picked somebody who was not Jewish and totally unlike his mother, as far as, well, just he didn't go for a nice Jewish girl who, you know, like his mother. And I thought that was interesting that his love interest, I mean, it could have been a Jewish girl who was much the same as Lee Remick.
Except
But
that,
his choice though,
yeah,
was not somebody, he didn't look for someone just like Mama.
she was a little bit like her. I
Yeah,
like the
Karen.
part where he
That was the
puts his,
argument that I was trying to make too, that she is perhaps more like his mother than he even realizes.
right, when he puts his feet on the table, she goes, get him off. And both of them are looking at him like, what's the matter with you? Get your shoes off the table.
Right, but there she's actually imitating his mother.
Yeah.
But in all the, you know, in all of the interaction that we have, you know, she's bossing him around, really. You know, even when I think you brought me down here just because you wanted to see me, right? You know, making him say things. I think the scene when he takes her out on the boat, I mean, doesn't she say to him, kiss me, right? You know, she tells him what to do over and over in the movie. So And certainly
Yeah,
she
she used to be
suggests
excellent.
at least that she's planning to
Are we
convert
on-
when
are we
she
on mute?
talks to the mother. So, you know, we'd have to check in on these characters a
Or
few
she's
years
not.
down the line and see. But that seems to be the direction it's going in. So I think he picked someone who's a fair amount like his mother, maybe more so than he even knows. And with that, I think we better end. We're
Yes.
past 3:00.
Right, so again, The Young Lions with Marlon Brando and Montgomery Clift is in YouTube. I put the link in the chat. If you need it, you know, you can always email me. And it's great to see everyone, and just watch your My Macomb at Home for all the stuff that's happening.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Nice to see you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.